A quiet older nurse is mocked for her old-school methods in a busy ER. When a critically injured general arrives and the head doctor's by-the-book approach fails, she is forced to make a choice that will reveal her secret, classified past. But will her actions save the decorated war hero, or will they end her career and land her in prison? The air in the emergency department at St. Jude's Metropolitan was a tired, recycled soup of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, coppery tang of human suffering. Fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous, buzzing drone, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare on the scuffed linoleum floors and the weary faces of the night shift. For Eleanor Vance, the sound was the metronome of her existence, a steady rhythm against which the chaotic symphony of trauma played out. She moved through the space with an economy of motion that belied her 50-something years, her steps silent and sure-footed in her worn, comfortable clogs. Her face, etched with fine lines of fatigue and concentration, was a mask of professional calm, her graying hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. To the younger staff, she was just Ellie, the quiet, old-school nurse who still preferred paper charting for her personal notes, and who could find a vein on a dehydrated octogenarian with the instinct of a water diviner. She was an artifact, a relic from a time before digital monitors tracked every breath and algorithm-driven protocols dictated every decision. They saw her quiet competence as timidness, her meticulous habits as a sign of being past her prime. Dr. Alistair Finch, the attending physician tonight, was the most vocal proponent of this view. He strode through the ER like a minor princeling surveying his fiefdom, his expensive Italian leather shoes squeaking an arrogant rhythm on the polished floor. He was young, brilliant in the academic sense, and possessed a confidence that bordered on theatrical. He saw medicine as a series of solvable equations, and people as the messy variables that complicated his elegant solutions. "Eleanor," he called, his voice sharp, not bothering to look up from the tablet in his hand. "Did you get the labs for bed 4? The system says they're pending. I can't be expected to make a diagnosis with incomplete data." He tapped impatiently on the screen, a portrait of modern medical frustration. "I drew them myself 20 minutes ago, Dr. Finch," Ellie replied, her voice low and even. She was checking the calibration on a portable defibrillator, her hands moving with a practiced, unhurried grace. "The pneumatic tube system to the lab is down again. A tech is running the samples by foot. They'll be posted in another 10. Finch sighed, a gust of performative exasperation. "Everything in this hospital is archaic. The people, the equipment, it's like working in a museum." He glanced at her, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "No offense, of course." Ellie didn't react. Offense was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was an emotion, and emotions were inefficient. They clouded judgment and wasted energy. She simply nodded, finished her checks on the defibrillator, and marked the log with a neat, precise signature. She had worked with dozens of doctors like Finch over the years, men and women who mistook knowledge for wisdom and confidence for competence. They were a known quantity, a predictable variable in the complex calculus of saving lives. They were a problem to be managed, not a force to be confronted. Her world was one of observation, of quiet assessment, of knowing the difference between the noise of panic and the signal of true crisis. She watched the subtle tells, the slight tremor in a resident's hand, the way a patient's skin tone shifted under the harsh lights, the almost imperceptible change in the rhythm of the monitors that foretold a coming crash. Her senses were her primary diagnostic tools, honed in environments far less forgiving than this one. Sometimes, as she stood in the relative quiet between traumas, she would catch her reflection in the dark glass of a monitor screen. The woman looking back was a stranger, a ghost wearing a nurse's scrubs. The eyes, however, were the same. They were old eyes, eyes that had seen too much to ever be surprised again. They held the deep, still cold of a past she had buried under years of routine and anonymity. Her hands, though now gentle and steady as they started an IV or comforted a frightened child, remembered the feel of different tools, the cold, machined steel of a rifle stock, the slickness of packing gauze into a wound that was not a clean surgical incision, but a ragged, gaping maw torn by shrapnel. She remembered the grit of sand under her fingernails and the acrid smell of cordite that clung to everything. She had traded that world for this one, the battlefield for the emergency room, believing them to be different. But she had learned over the years that trauma was trauma. The mechanisms of injury changed, but the fundamental fragility of the human body remained a constant. The only difference was that here, the enemy was time, disease, and sometimes the very system designed to help. And tonight, the enemy was also the smug self-assurance of Dr. Alistair Finch. She finished her rounds, a silent sentinel in a sea of controlled chaos, her mind cataloging every detail, every sound, every smell. She was waiting. In her experience, the quiet moments were always the ones that preceded the storm. The storm arrived at 2:17 a.m. The piercing wail of an incoming ambulance cut through the relative lull of the night, followed by the urgent crackle of the paramedic's voice over the radio. "St. Jude's, this is Medic 1. We are 5 minutes out with a Priority 1 trauma. Single male victim, approximately 65 years of age, ejected from a vehicle in a single-car MVC. GCS of 8, hypotensive and tachycardic. Obvious deformity to the right lower extremity and significant abdominal bruising. ETA, 5 minutes." The practiced ballet of the trauma team began. Chloe, a bright-eyed young nurse who often shadowed Ellie, began prepping Trauma Bay 1, her movements quick but tinged with nervous energy. Dr. Finch strode to the head of the bay, pulling on a pair of gloves with a dramatic snap. "All right, people, let's look alive," he commanded, his voice ringing with the thrill of the impending challenge. "Standard ATLS protocol on arrival. Chloe, I want 2 large-bore IVs, wide open. Get trauma labs, type and cross for 4 units. Eleanor, you're on airway. Let's be ready for a rapid sequence intubation." Ellie nodded, her expression unreadable as she moved to the head of the gurney, her hands laying out the intubation kit with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. She didn't need the order. She had already anticipated it. The doors to the ambulance bay hissed open, and the paramedics burst through, their faces grim. The patient on the gurney was a mess. He was an older man, distinguished-looking even beneath the blood and grime, with a shock of silver hair matted to his forehead. His breathing was shallow and rapid, a desperate rattling sound. His clothes, an expensive-looking suit, were torn and stained. He was found down an embankment off the old highway, the lead paramedic reported breathlessly as they transferred the patient. No witnesses. Car was completely totaled. Blood pressure is 80/40 and falling. Pulse 130. We pushed a liter of saline, but he's not responding. Dr. Finch took charge, his voice a sharp, commanding bark. "On my count. 1, 2, 3. They moved the man onto the trauma bed. The monitors shrieked to life, confirming the paramedic's grim report. The man's blood pressure was circling the drain. "Right, let's get this shirt off. Chloe, where are those IVs? I need access now." Finch's eyes scanned the monitors, his mind clearly running through the textbook algorithm. Car accident, blunt abdominal trauma, hypotension. The diagnosis was obvious: internal bleeding. "Get the fast scan in here. Someone call the OR and tell them we're coming up. He's bleeding out." Ellie, however, was looking at the patient, not the numbers on the screen. Her gaze was intense, analytical, sweeping over the man's body in a practiced, systematic way. Something was wrong. The pattern of injury wasn't consistent with a simple motor vehicle collision, even a violent one. There was a peculiar, almost geometric pattern of deep bruising across his abdomen and chest, not the diffuse, chaotic bruising she'd expect from a steering wheel or dashboard impact. And there were small, punctate lacerations on his arms and neck, little nicks that looked almost like shrapnel wounds. Her eyes narrowed. She had seen this before. In a dusty, sun-scorched village in a country whose name was now just a whisper in the news. It was the signature of a specific type of explosive, one designed for a low thermal signature and a focused blast wave. It wasn't a car crash. The ultrasound technician wheeled the portable machine in. Finch grabbed the probe, slathering gel on the man's abdomen. He pressed down, his eyes glued to the small screen. "I'm not seeing a massive bleed in the belly," he muttered, his voice laced with confusion and frustration. "Morrison's pouch is clear. Splenorenal space is clear. Damn it! Where is he bleeding from?" The patient's pressure dropped again, the monitor emitting a dire, low-pitched alarm. "Hang another unit of saline. Push it in," Finch ordered, his voice rising in pitch. "Doctor," Ellie said, her voice quiet but cutting through the rising panic. "Saline will make it worse. He's not just bleeding. He's in blast-induced coagulopathy. The shock wave has shredded his capillaries. The saline will just dilute his clotting factors and increase the pressure, forcing more fluid into his third spaces." Her diagnosis hung in the air, a piece of arcane knowledge from a world none of them understood. Finch glared at her, his face flushing with anger. "What are you talking about? Blast-induced what? This was a car accident, nurse. Stick to what you know. Now hang the damn saline." The patient's heart rate suddenly plummeted. The steady beep of the monitor degraded into a chaotic, discordant rhythm. "He's in VTAC! It's Torsades!" Chloe shouted, her eyes wide with fear. "Get the crash cart!" Finch yelled, his composure shattering completely. "Push mag sulfate! Charge the paddles to 200! He was losing control, defaulting to a chaotic scramble of protocols that were failing because his initial diagnosis was wrong. The patient's life was slipping away, measured in the frantic, useless beats of his failing heart. Ellie watched for a fraction of a second as they fumbled with the paddles, as Finch barked contradictory orders. She saw the man's face, the gray pallor of imminent death. She had seen that look too many times, and she had made a promise to herself, long ago in that dusty village, that she would never stand by and watch it happen again, if she had the power to stop it. The time for observation was over. The time for action was now. Her choice was made in the space of a single, chaotic heartbeat. Her career, her carefully constructed anonymity, her quiet life, all of it was secondary to the life fading on the gurney in front of her. She moved with a speed and purpose that was shocking. "Stop," she said. The word was not a request. It was a command, delivered with an authority that silenced the room. Finch, paddles in hand, froze, and stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Vance, have you gone insane?" he hissed. "Get out of my way!" Ellie ignored him. She brushed past him, her eyes locked on the patient and the monitor. "It's not just Torsades. It's driven by hypocalcemia from the shockwave lysis. Magnesium won't touch it." Her voice was a low, urgent monotone, the words a foreign language to everyone but her. She reached into the crash cart, her hand bypassing the standard cardiac drugs and snatching a vial of calcium gluconate and a 10cc syringe. "Chloe, give me a central line kit. Now!" The young nurse, caught between the attending's furious glare and Ellie's absolute certainty, hesitated for a split second. Then, something in Ellie's eyes, a deep, unwavering conviction, made the decision for her. She slapped the kit onto the tray beside Ellie. Finch took a step forward, his face a mask of rage. "I am ordering you to stand down, nurse. You are endangering this patient. You are finished." Ellie didn't even look at him. Her focus was absolute. In a few deft, brutally efficient movements, she prepped the patient's neck, found the internal jugular vein by landmark with an instinct that was more tactile than visual, and slid the large-bore catheter in as if she had done it 1,000 times under fire. Because she had. Blood flashed in the line. She secured it with one hand while drawing up the calcium with the other. "Pushing 10 of calcium gluconate slow," she announced to the room, though she was speaking more to herself, a familiar mantra from a past life. She injected the drug with a slow, steady pressure, her eyes never leaving the monitor. For a terrifying handful of seconds, nothing happened. The chaotic waveform of the Torsades continued its deadly dance across the screen. Finch's face twisted into a triumphant sneer. "You see? You've killed him, you incompetent old..." His words were cut off by a sudden, sharp beep from the monitor. The chaotic rhythm faltered, then broke. Another beep, and then another. A normal sinus rhythm, weak but steady, bloomed across the screen. The patient's blood pressure, which had been non-existent, registered a fragile 70/40. A A collective gasp went through the room. They had been seconds from calling a code, and now the man was back. Stabilized by a procedure none of them had ever seen, based on a diagnosis none of them understood. In the stunned silence that followed, Ellie continued to work. Her hands were a blur of motion, grabbing bags of plasma and platelets from the trauma refrigerator. "Forget the saline and packed cells for now," she ordered, her voice resonating with an authority no one dared question. "We need to replace his clotting factors. A 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. Plasma, platelets, PRBCs. Chloe, help me." Chloe, her face a mixture of awe and terror, scrambled to obey. They worked in tandem, a seamless, efficient unit, while Dr. Finch stood frozen, the useless defibrillator paddle still hanging in his hands, his face pale with shock and fury. As Ellie reached across the patient to adjust a line, the sleeve of her scrubs rode up her forearm, exposing her wrist. There, inked in faded black against her pale skin, was a small, intricate tattoo. It wasn't a flower or a butterfly. It was a shield, crossed by a lightning bolt and a serpent-entwined dagger, with a single, stylized wing emerging from the side. It was a symbol that meant nothing to the civilian staff of St. Jude's, but it was not meant for them. The fragile peace was shattered by Finch's enraged roar. "Security!" he bellowed, finally finding his voice. "Get security in here now! This nurse assaulted me. She went against my direct orders, and she has performed procedures far outside her scope of practice. I want her arrested." His voice cracked with a mixture of righteous indignation and raw humiliation. He had been shown up, his authority usurped in his own trauma bay by a nurse he considered little more than a fossil. His ego, far more fragile than the patient's life had been, was shattered. Two hospital security guards, burly men more accustomed to dealing with drunks and distraught family members, hurried into the bay, their expressions uncertain. They saw a stabilized patient, a young nurse working diligently, an enraged doctor pointing a trembling finger, and Ellie, who stood calm and composed, checking the drip rate of the plasma. "Ma'am," the senior guard said hesitantly, approaching Ellie, "the doctor says we need you to come with us." Ellie finished her adjustment and turned to face them, her expression unreadable. "This patient is not stable enough to be left," she stated simply. It was a fact, not an argument. "I'll be the judge of that!" Finch shrieked. He lunged forward, grabbing Ellie's arm to physically drag her away from the bedside. It was a foolish, impulsive move, born of pure fury. What happened next was so fast, so economical, that it was almost invisible. Ellie didn't strike him. She didn't push him. She simply used his own momentum against him. Her body shifted, a subtle pivot at the hips. Her free hand came up, not to block, but to guide his wrist, her thumb finding a precise pressure point. At the same time, she rotated her captured arm, locking his elbow joint. Finch's forward lunge was instantly converted into an awkward, painful posture, forcing him to his knees. He was completely immobilized, a pained grunt escaping his lips. There was no struggle, no violence. It was a simple, brutal application of physics and anatomy, a tactical restraint designed to neutralize a threat with maximum efficiency and minimum effort. The two security guards stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide. They had seen bar fights and desperate struggles, but they had never seen anything like this. It was like watching a mongoose handle a cobra. Chloe let out a small, terrified squeak. In the midst of the tableau, a low groan came from the gurney. The patient's eyes flickered open. They were cloudy with pain and confusion, but they were intelligent eyes. They roamed the scene, taking in the doctor on his knees, the stunned guards, and the calm nurse who held him there. His gaze fell upon Ellie's exposed wrist, on the faded black ink of the winged shield. Recognition dawned in his eyes, cutting through the fog of trauma. His voice was a dry, raspy whisper, but it carried across the silent room with the weight of a thunderclap. "Valkyrie?" The name hung in the air, alien and potent. Finch, still caught in Ellie's grip, looked up in confusion. "What did you say?" The patient ignored him, his eyes locked on Ellie's. "Valkyrie. Unit 732, he rasped, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. My God, it really is you. Ellie's composure finally broke. Just for an instant, a flicker of something, recognition, pain, memory, crossed her face. She released Dr. Finch, who scrambled backward on the floor, rubbing his wrist and staring at her with a new kind of fear. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, terrifying confusion. Just then, the doors to the ER swished open again. This time, it wasn't paramedics. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits entered, moving with the quiet, predatory confidence of federal agents. They were followed by a man in the full dress uniform of a United States Army general, his chest a constellation of ribbons and medals. They swept into the trauma bay, their eyes taking in the scene with practiced, analytical speed. The uniformed general's gaze fell on the patient on the gurney, and his face went pale. "General Harding!" he exclaimed, rushing to the bedside. "Robert, what happened?" General Harding, the patient, managed a weak smile. He lifted a trembling hand, not toward his uniformed colleague, but toward Ellie. "It's all right, Mark," he whispered. "I'm all right. Thanks to her." He looked at Ellie, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless gratitude and a shared understanding that transcended the chaos of the room. "They told me Valkyrie went dark, vanished, said you were a ghost story they told new recruits." The second general, Mark, turned his gaze to Ellie. He looked at her rumpled scrubs, her tired face, and then his eyes fell on the tattoo on her wrist. His military bearings snapped into place, his back ramrod straight. A look of pure, unadulterated shock and reverence washed over his features. "Sergeant Major Vance," he said, his voice hushed, as if speaking a hallowed name. "Eleanor Vance. It's an honor, ma'am." He actually gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head. The entire room, from the security guards to Chloe to the shell-shocked Dr. Finch, stared in utter disbelief. An active duty, 4-star general was showing deference to a nurse. Finch staggered to his feet, his mind refusing to process what was happening. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice shrill. "This woman is a nurse. She assaulted me. She nearly killed this patient with some voodoo medicine. I want her out of here." General Mark turned his head slowly, fixing Finch with a glare so cold it could have frozen plasma. "Doctor," he said, his voice lethally soft, "you will stand down and you will be silent, or I will have my men silence you permanently." The two agents in suits took a half-step forward, their hands resting near their jackets. The threat was not hyperbole. Finch's mouth snapped shut, a strangled sound dying in his throat. General Harding took a slow, rattling breath, his strength returning minute by minute as the plasma and platelets did their work. "The doctor is mistaken, Mark," he said, his voice gaining clarity. "My car didn't crash. It was a device, planted under the chassis, a directional charge, military grade. I recognized the concussion wave." His eyes found Ellie's again. She recognized the wound pattern. He didn't. He was pumping me full of saline, making it worse. He was following his little rule book while I was dying. She knew. She saved my life. The pieces clicked into place with an audible, shattering finality. The atypical bruising, the shrapnel-like cuts, the specific coagulopathy, it all made sense. Ellie's unorthodox treatment wasn't voodoo. It was the specific, field-tested countermeasure for that exact weapon of war. It was a protocol that didn't exist in any civilian textbook. It was knowledge bought with blood and experience in the deadliest places on Earth. The proof of her methods was lying on the gurney, breathing, his heart beating in a steady, life-affirming rhythm. The hospital administrator, a portly man named Henderson, who had been summoned from his bed, arrived in a flurry of anxiety, his tie askew. He took one look at the two generals, the dark-suited agents, and the humiliated Dr. Finch cowering in the corner, and began to sweat profusely. "General, I don't know what to say. Is there anything we can do?" General Mark didn't even look at him. He was still focused on Ellie. "Dr. Finch," he said, his voice like chipping ice, believed he knew better than Sergeant Major Vance. "Let me offer some context for you all." He swept his gaze around the room, making eye contact with every stunned staff member. "You see a nurse. I see the most decorated combat medic in the history of Joint Special Operations Command. Valkyrie wasn't just a call sign, it was a legend. She was the senior enlisted medic for a Tier 1 ghost unit you are not cleared to know exists. She has performed surgery in blacked-out helicopters, set bones in flooded caves, and saved lives with nothing more than a needle and her own bare hands. The protocols she developed for treating blast trauma are now the classified standard for all U.S. Special Forces. She has more confirmed saves in contested territory than this entire hospital sees in a year. He took a step closer to Finch, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You, Doctor? With your fancy degree and your squeaky shoes, you stood in the presence of greatness, and you were too arrogant and too ignorant to see it. You didn't just fail your patient. You interfered with an operator of a caliber you cannot possibly comprehend. You are lucky to be breathing. Had she been on mission, your insubordination would have been dealt with. The finality in his tone left no doubt as to the meaning. Henderson, the administrator, looked like he was about to faint. He turned a horrified, apoplectic glare on Finch. Finch, you're suspended. Effective immediately. Get out of this hospital. Security, escort him out. The two guards, now looking at Finch with open contempt, were more than happy to oblige. They each took one of his arms and marched the disgraced doctor out of the ER, his protests dying in the hallway. A new order had been established, forged in the crucible of Trauma Bay 1. The rigid hierarchy of the hospital had been inverted. The quiet, underestimated nurse revealed as the true authority in the room. Justice had been swift and absolute. General Mark turned back to Ellie, his expression softening. I apologize for the theatrics, Sergeant Major, and for this intrusion into your life. We had heard you'd retired, went somewhere quiet to get away from it all. I am retired, sir, Ellie said, her voice quiet but firm. She had reverted to the formal address out of instinct. I'm just a nurse now. With all due respect, General Harding said from the gurney, his voice stronger now, you've never been just anything. Eleanor, you left. You vanished without a trace. We all thought, well, it doesn't matter. What matters is you were here tonight. That's a debt I can never repay. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. But I can try. This life, this quiet life, is it what you want? Or is it just what you settled for? Ellie looked down at her hands, still covered in the general's blood. She had run from the ghosts of her past, from the violence and the noise, seeking peace in the quiet order of a civilian hospital. But the ghosts had found her anyway. And in the moment of crisis, she hadn't been a nurse. She had been Valkyrie. And she had not felt fear or panic, but a deep, resonant sense of purpose. A clarity she hadn't felt in years. I don't know anymore, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I have an idea, General Mark said, a shrewd look in his eye. The White House Medical Unit is looking for a new director of contingency operations. Someone to write the protocols for events no one wants to imagine. Mass casualty, chemical, biological. Someone who doesn't just read the books, but has written them in the field. It's a quiet job, mostly. But it's a job where your unique experience would be the primary qualification. No more arrogant residents. No more budget meetings. Just you, a team of the best, and a mission to prepare for the worst. It's yours if you want it. The offer hung in the air, a lifeline back to a world she understood, but on her own terms. A position that didn't require her to hide, but celebrated who she truly was. It was not a reward. It was a recognition. Hours later, the sun was beginning to streak the sky with shades of gray and pink. The chaos had subsided. General Harding was stable in the ICU, with a full Secret Service detail outside his door. The ER had been scrubbed clean, the remnants of the night's battle erased. Ellie was finishing her paperwork, the familiar routine a comforting anchor in the swirling sea of her thoughts. Chloe approached her station, her steps hesitant. The young nurse's face was still filled with awe. Sergeant Major, she began, fumbling with the name. Ellie is fine, Chloe, she said, offering a small, tired smile. I've never seen anything like it, Chloe breathed. The way you took control. The way you knew exactly what to do when everyone else was panicking. They teach us protocols and algorithms, but they don't teach us that. How did you know? Ellie paused, her pen hovering over the chart. She looked at the earnest, curious face of the young woman who represented the future of her profession. She thought of the years of brutal training, the missions in the dark, the friends she had lost. How could she possibly explain it all? She settled for the simplest truth. The monitors tell you what's happening, she said, her voice soft. The protocols tell you what to do next. But the patient tells you the real story. You just have to be quiet enough to listen. She signed the chart, her signature the same neat, precise script as always. But it felt different now. It was no longer the signature of an anonymous nurse hiding from her past, but the mark of a legend who had finally been seen. Later, she stood by General Harding's bedside. He was awake and lucid, the monitors beside him beeping in a steady, reassuring rhythm. They didn't speak of the offer, or the past. There was no need. They were survivors of the same tribe, bound by a shared understanding of sacrifice and survival. He simply reached out a hand, and she took it. His grip was weak, but firm. "Thank you, Valkyrie," he whispered. "Get some rest, Robert," she replied, using his first name for the first time. It was a quiet moment of communion, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between the saved and the savior. As she left the room, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had spent a decade trying to outrun the ghost of Valkyrie, only to discover that the ghost was not a monster to be feared, but the truest part of herself. True heroes didn't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they wore scrubs and carried the quiet weight of a past no one could see, ready for the moment they were needed most.